Why people who prefer being alone often had this childhood. In 1660, a French mathematician named Blaise Pascal wrote one sentence that diagnosed every problem in the human condition. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. 300 years later, neuroscience finally explained why some men actually prefer being alone, and it had almost nothing to do with personality. It had everything to do with the specific childhood that shaped them, before they were old enough to remember. It is a Saturday morning in late October, somewhere in central Vermont. A man named Thomas, 54, is at his cabin alone. Coffee, wood stove, a book he won't finish. His wife is 2 hours south at her sister's place. His grown sons haven't called this month. And somewhere underneath the quiet, something his 5-year-old self learned a long time ago is finally being given permission to rest. Thomas is a senior structural engineer in Boston, married 12 years to Karen. He has owned this cabin since 2003. He didn't choose Vermont. Vermont chose him the summer. Thomas turned 9 when his father died of a heart attack, and his mother began working 2 jobs. And his uncle drove up every June to take him to the cabin and not say much. Karen calls it the Vermont disease, the one where you'd rather chop wood for 2 hours than make conversation for 10 minutes. She says it the way some wives say it about football. Thomas doesn't argue. Some details have been changed for privacy. Thomas and the other men you'll meet tonight are drawn from patterns I have observed across many men I have known. What he doesn't realize, what almost no mature mind like him realizes, is something simple. 7 distinct things happened in his childhood. They built the man currently chopping wood in October. Let's name them. 1. The inconsistent warmth. In Thomas's house, there was a version of his mother that was warm, present, available. And there was another version exhausted, distant, unreachable, not from cruelty, from grief and rent and 2 jobs that hollow a person out. You never knew which one would be there when you came home from school. Your brain, doing exactly what brains are designed to do, learned to prepare for both. It learned that warmth disappears without warning. That closeness can be taken back. Psychologists call this insecure attachment. And here is what almost nobody explains. It does not make you afraid of people. It makes you afraid of needing them. Because needing someone who might not be there when you reach is a specific kind of pain. If you just felt something tighten in your chest listening to that recognition is your right brain remembering before your left brain has language for it. 2. The unmirrored emotion. In a healthy childhood, a parent acts as a mirror. When a child cries, the parent says something like, "You are frustrated because the toy broke." That sentence does something invisible and essential. It connects the physical sensation in the body to a word. The child learns to name what they feel because someone older named it for them first. In Thomas's house, this mirroring rarely happened. Not from malice, from bandwidth. There was no one available to label the inside of a 9-year-old who had just lost his father, so the inside stayed unlabeled. And a child who cannot name what he feels grows into a man who, when someone asks how he feels, reaches for the answer and finds something genuinely blank. That blankness is not coldness. It is silence where a voice should have been taught. 3. The early invitation to handle it alone. Some children did not choose to be self-sufficient. They were trained into it before they had any other option. Consider Edward, 58, a retired hand surgeon, middle child of 6 in a chaotic Catholic house. By 7, he had learned to disappear into books, quiet, low maintenance, undemanding. The adults called him the easy child. Only Edward knew what easy meant. Easy meant invisible. A child told directly or by absence that needing is a problem will eventually stop needing, or convince himself he has. He becomes the kind of man who handles a hospital stay alone, writes his own retirement speech, processes his father's death in a parking lot before going back inside. On the surface, this becomes a strength. Underneath, something else lives entirely. Here is where it gets interesting. In 1955, on the island of Kauai, developmental psychologist Emmy Werner began following 698 children from birth. 201 of them faced the worst odds: poverty, mental illness in the home, neglect. 40 years later, Werner published a finding that broke a lot of assumptions. 1/3 of those high-risk children had grown into competent, capable, caring adults. Not despite their childhood, because of something they learned to do with it. Around the same time, UCLA neuroscientist Alan Shore mapped why the right side of an infant's brain develops before language. It is shaped by attunement, or the absence of it, in the first 3 years. It encodes body-level certainty about whether closeness is safe long before the conscious mind exists to question it. This is why the man at 50 still holds the door handle silently when he closes a door. The pattern was learned in tissue that learned before words. 4. The calibrated nervous system. Pause for a moment. Notice your shoulders right now. Notice your jaw. Notice the muscles between your shoulder blades. If any of them are quietly holding something, that is the pattern we are naming. In Thomas's house, in Edward's house, in any house where the emotional weather was unpredictable, a child's nervous system adapted. It became more alert, more sensitive, more easily flooded by input that other people barely register. You have been reading rooms like that since you were 9, tracking moods before words, knowing the temperature of a kitchen before anyone has spoken. The system was never told the job was over. It has been working without a break, without a thank you, for 40 years. 5. The depth of attention. You notice things other people walked past. The slight shift in someone's tone. The tension in a room nobody else seemed to register. The emotion underneath what was said that had nothing to do with the words. There are men listening to this right now who have spent 40 years assuming everyone perceives the world this thoroughly. They don't. You do. That is bandwidth, not damage. The bandwidth of a child who had to read more carefully than the children around him, in order to navigate something the children around him weren't asked to navigate. Stop here for a moment. If you have made it this deep into a video about childhood patterns without scrolling away, you are the kind of mature mind these videos exist for. Subscribe, there is a new one every week. Back to the 7. 6. The sanctuary built in childhood. Werner's resilient 1/3 had something in common. Almost all of them had built a private place, physical or mental, where competence was developed in solitude. A book corner, a workshop, a back field. Consider Raymond, 51. A former newspaper editor in Massachusetts. His mother was a single mom working nights as a nurse after his father left. Raymond ate dinner alone watching the news. By age 10, he had built his office in the garage, a typewriter on a card table, a dictionary, 3 encyclopedia volumes salvaged from the town dump. Solitude was never deprivation for Raymond. Solitude was the room where he became himself. 7. The quiet authority that emerged anyway. This is the pattern almost nobody names. You were not a child who couldn't connect. You were a child who learned to navigate the world without the connection you should have been given. That is a different thing entirely, and the men who confuse the two have never sat alone in a Vermont cabin in October feeling finally at home in their own mind. They are still in the world Pascal described, the world of men who cannot sit quietly in a room alone. You can. You learn to. And the cost of learning to is also the proof that you did. Now here is the part almost no one tells men in their 50s and 60s. At Stanford, psychologist Laura Carstensen has spent 40 years studying how motivation changes across the lifespan. Her finding, replicated dozens of times, is this. As perceived time shortens with age, the mind shifts. It becomes selective. It invests in fewer, deeper connections. It honors quality over quantity in a way younger people cannot yet understand. What feels like a childhood pattern at 35 is also a developmental milestone at 55. The question of what is broken in you collapses when you realize you have grown into exactly the mind the second half of life was designed to develop. Which leaves one question. What do you actually do with this tonight, this week, this year? Here is a tool. Psychologist Peter Levine showed that the body needs to oscillate between contraction and expansion to release stored survival energy. The release is not a single breath. It is hundreds of small ones, over months. Try this right now. Find one place in your body that is holding something neck, jaw, between the shoulder blades. Just notice it. Don't try to fix it. Then find one place that feels neutral, maybe your forearm, maybe the soles of your feet on the floor. Move your attention back and forth between them. Contraction. Ease. Contraction. Ease. Slowly. 40-year-old patterns do not release on a single afternoon. But they do release. And the body, the part of you that learned this before you had language, is also the part of you that can finally let it go. And one more thing for the men listening with 20, 30, 50 years of marriage already behind them. John Gottman, at the University of Washington, spent 40 years studying what separates couples who last from couples who don't. The answer was not chemistry. It was not even fighting style. It was something quieter. Masters of relationship turned toward their partner's small bids for connection 86% of the time. Couples who eventually divorced, only 33. The work was never about finding the right person. The work is recognizing the bid when she puts the coffee cup down a little harder than usual. That bid is yours to receive or to miss, None of this replaces working with a therapist if something between you needs more than one video can offer. Pascal said it in 1660. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. 366 years later, the diagnosis still holds. Most men cannot do it. Most reach for the phone, the bottle, the conversation, the screen, anything to avoid the room. You can. You learn to. And whatever it cost you to learn, and it cost you something you developed, a capacity that most of the species spends a lifetime never developing. That is not a wound. That is a craft. The world will not call it that. The world will call it withdrawal, or distance, or being difficult to know. The world is wrong about you. It has been for a long time. And the man at the Vermont cabin in October knows it even if he has never had the language to say it out loud. There is one more piece of research worth knowing tonight. In 2002, researchers at the University of Minnesota published a 23-year longitudinal study with a finding that took attachment science decades to accept. Adults who had difficult childhoods but who developed a coherent story about what happened ended up parenting as effectively as adults who had secure childhoods. Researchers call this earned secure attachment. You weren't born secure. You weren't given secure. You built secure slowly, mostly without help, mostly without knowing what you were building. The word for what you are is earned secure. It is the most underrated achievement in adult psychology. One note before we land. Nothing here is a clinical diagnosis. If any of these 7 patterns map onto something heavier in your life right now, depression that won't lift, persistent dissociation, low mood that has stayed for months, please reach out to a licensed therapist. This video is a starting point, not a replacement. There are men at 74 who say and mean that life is good. They aren't the ones who had easier childhoods. They are the ones who finally found language for what they did with the one they had. In the comments, type the number 1 through 7 that landed hardest, and the age you first noticed it. I read every one. If you want more like this, the bell is there. On the screen now, 2 videos that go deeper into what we talked about tonight. One is on 7 signs that pain quietly changed the way you think. The other is on 5 things deep thinkers never explain to anyone. Pick whichever speaks to you tonight.